Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Exploring Strategy Workshop 2024. It's 3 minutes past, so we'll start now. I can see a couple of people are just trickling in, but it's just my introductions you'll be missing. A very warm welcome to all of you. And firstly, apologise if anything I do is fairly unrehearsed. I've stepped in at the last minute. Kirsten, who is our product manager for our strategy list and works closely with the author team, is unfortunately unwell today. So but I know many of you from the past from running this workshop and delighted to be here today. A big thank you to the author team who've put today's workshop together. I'm just going to quickly talk through some housekeeping and the agenda, and then I'll share my screens and hand over to the author team who are running this first session. So today's workshop, brief agenda, we'll start for the first hour and 25 minutes or so talking about teaching with Exploring Strategy, talking about the latest edition of both Exploring Strategy and Fundamentals of Strategy, introducing our new author, and talking about bits of the work plan for today. Then we'll have a short morning break before moving on to doing some teaching and writing case studies. And Duncan will lead a session about publishing to make a difference. We've got a lunchtime break, 40 minutes, where we'll have some optional breakout groups for those of you who'd like to socialise and do a bit of networking. Then after lunch, we'll be talking about artificial intelligence in the classroom and assessment before going on to research and teaching. Then we'll finish the day with the swap shop, where we'll be exchanging ideas, talking about anything that you're struggling with or anything that's working well and helping each other. So this morning session will set up that swap shop. So if you are looking forward to that swap shop, please do stay for this morning. We'll have some breakout groups where we'll be setting up some of that swap shop. Please do use the chat. Please do come off mute and interact. We've got a few polls throughout the day. We want today to be as interactive as possible. We're delighted you've given up your time to be here, but we hope you can learn partly from the author team, but partly from each other as well. So please do interact, ask questions, and engage in all the polls. And for any chat questions you've got, either practically or about the slides in the chat room. With that, I'm going to hand over to Julia, I believe, who's going to introduce herself as the new member of the author team.
Yes, thank you, Rufus, for the introduction. And thank you, everybody, first of all, for being here and joining us today. As Rufus has mentioned it, I was invited to join the author team for the next edition, which is a big honor for me. My name is Julia Hautz. I'm a professor of strategic management at the University of Innsbruck in Austria. I have long used the book Exploring Strategy myself in teaching various strategy classes over the last 15, 16 years. And therefore, as I've mentioned, it's a big honor for me to become part of the team and to engage with the author team and the case writing team in the next edition, and working on keeping Exploring Strategy up to date, keeping illustrations, cases, and topics up to date, including new topics. So I'm really looking forward to this day, engage with you on the book, but also to work with the book and the author team in the coming years.
Great. Thank you, Julia. It's great to have you on board as a new member of the team. Duncan, is this?
Yeah, this is me. So this is to introduce the fact that we now have a new 6th edition of Fundamentals of Strategy in a rather interesting colour, I think, but I think it grabs attention. I'd like to start by just talking a little bit about the cover. I don't know if you realise, but covers are not accidental, and we've spent a lot of time agonising on what our covers should look like and what they should include and what they shouldn't include. So we are communicating, if you like, through our cover about what we think is important for strategy. And essentially looking at this cover, you'll see that there's some rational strategy here, that's right at centre stage, but also there are human elements, and this is why we have a diverse group, if you like, around the visual at the centre. And also what we're trying to convey is the fact that strategy is about practices, that it's about hard, effortful work, which often gets lost. And I think it's fair to say that a number of our competitors ignore the human and also downplay or possibly ignore also the practices. And these things are very important to us for both our textbooks. And the final point to make is that this is linking with our main text, Exploring Strategy. And if you look back through the editions, you'll notice that the fundamentals of strategy covers are in some way, the images themselves are in some way related to the main book itself. So they tend to be slightly simplified, which befits, I think, a book that's about the fundamentals. So essentially what we believe we've created is a concise and easy to follow introduction to the core issues and techniques of strategy. And we have updated it to reflect contemporary strategic issues. So we obviously talk a bit about COVID, but we also talk about the rise of digital and so forth. And we have increased emphasis on a number of topics, such as purpose, business ecosystems, platforms, and strategy implementation. And we'll be talking more about those later in this particular session. It's probably worth saying that the book has always had quite a lot on implementation, but we've not always used that as a word. But now we've decided that it should be highlighted more so that we are quite focused on implementation. There are new cases and illustrations throughout, and we believe these help develop understanding of how theories apply to real-world scenarios and also the strategic choices facing today's organizations. And because the book is, if you like, hand in glove with the main text, Exploring Strategy, it means that you can go between the two. So if you wish a deeper understanding or more content or more illustrations or more case studies, then you can move seamlessly, if you like, between the fundamentals of strategy and Exploring Strategy. They are, as I say, hand in glove in those terms. And then finally, we have a new supporting piece at the end of the book called Working with Strategy. This came from a number of observations regarding the main text, that perhaps we weren't giving students enough indications and support about how they might do strategy. And so therefore we have more tools to allow them to develop their strategic analysis, to help them understand how you go about doing good case studies, if you like, good case study analysis, and importantly, how you communicate with strategy to a variety of stakeholders. So again, coming back to the cover that I talked about at the beginning, we do focus very much on the practices of strategy, not only looking at managers, but also in terms of our students as well. So hopefully that's a good overview of fundamentals, and I hope you take away the fact that it's very closely linked to the main text, and it is possible for students and teachers to flip between them, depending on the level of depth that you are interested in. Thank you.
This one's me. Thank you, Duncan. I think the author team of Exploring Strategy can make a solemn promise. We shall never issue an edition with some chess pieces on the front cover. We are not about that kind of analytical, artificial world where some of our alternative textbooks are. So purpose, I think, links to that, and we'll touch on purpose again when Julia will be talking about the illustrations. Is anyone? I'm encouraging people to use the chat. So who is teaching a lot on purpose? Can somebody enter into the chat? I'm teaching a lot on purpose and I'm finding it great, or I'm finding it difficult. I think it's a tricky subject, not least because of what we have here, which is a new addition to chapter 1. What we call the strategy hierarchy often gets really blurred. Are people finding that with their students? That it's difficult to tell the difference between purpose, vision, mission, and objectives? Certainly I do. So the kinds of statements that we have in the hang on, I've just lost the text. Here we are. Thank you. The kind of purpose statements that we have in Exploring Strategy. Chapter 1, for instance, has an illustration on Samsung where the purpose is around inspiration. Oh, thank you, Eamon. Yeah, absolutely. Purpose being the North Star. That's a really good way of thinking about it. The very long term, maybe 30, even 50 years ahead. Alibaba, I remember, has a purpose of being in the business of facilitating e-commerce for 100 years. But Jack Ma of Alibaba, no longer perhaps, was never anything else but very ambitious. So purpose might be that. The Petrobras case at the end of chapter 6 has the petrol is ours, to reinforce the importance of petrol and oil for the nation of Brazil. So we have purpose statements in the book, but they do blur a little bit with vision and mission. We think of purpose as the most abstract, idealistic, and perhaps, following Eamon's point, the most long-term view of the organization's purpose or basic goals. We have moved, recognizing the importance of purpose. The title of chapter 5 in the old edition, chapter 6 of the new edition, has now become purpose and stakeholders. We haven't moved governance out altogether. Governance is about holding the organization true to purpose, vision, mission, and objectives. But purpose is now front of stage. That new chapter has values in, which is new material, corporate values. It has sustainable development goals and equality, diversity, and inclusion in. The SDGs are important, and they also occur in chapter 3. And they're part of the cross-cutting themes of edition 13, which Patrick and Julia will be talking about in the future. We also have stakeholder mapping, ownership models, CSRs, and the governance chain, which I mentioned. Something I'm going to touch on in a moment is managing hybridity. That's a new concept. And again, Julia will be talking about that with, I think, the Amsterdam donut model, which is one of the new illustrations in that chapter as well. So we think purpose is integral to the book. It reinforces the cross-cutting themes. We believe, and Eamon may have a view, oh, yeah, Michael, you got a good question there. We'll come to that. Eamon may have a view on that. We believe students too care about purpose, but it's controversial. Let me take Michael's point here. So I would say that purpose, vision, mission, and objectives feed into strategy. All four need to be consistent with the strategy. So these are, as it were, inputs, guides to the strategy. So where is strategy positioned in the hierarchy? Michael's question in the chat. It's the output of purpose, vision, mission, and objectives. Does that make sense? Duncan, this is your chapter. Do you have a view on this? Can you help me out there?
Yes, I suppose, yes, I can see that as an interpretation. I have probably a broader view that I think actually it's all within strategy.
Okay,
so I would like to see strategies encompassing all of that and more.
Yeah, I think that's all of these things feed into strategy. Michael, have you got a quick one, perhaps to respond in chat? Let me know what you think. Let us all know what we think. You think. Okay, could I have the next slide, please, Rufus? So I just wanted, with this slide, when we wrote the chapter, Larry Fink's advice to chief executives about the importance of ESG and particularly purpose was really prominent. Larry Fink runs BlackRock, the largest asset management company in the world, therefore hugely influential on business practice because he's an investor in many of the largest companies. Larry Fink said, the more your company can show its purpose in delivering value to its customers, etc., the better able you will be to compete and deliver long-term, this speaks to Eamon's point, durable profits. As you will have seen, Vivek Ramaswamy and many, many others in the United States have been leading a campaign against purpose. In fact, Vivek Ramaswamy set up a fund which actually is betting against purpose-driven companies. It hasn't raised as much money as he hoped. He was campaigning to be Republican president. We can see that purpose is controversial and difficult. If I have the last slide, I can just touch on the last point. So what we have recognized in the book, and Mariah Besheroff, my colleague at Oxford at Saïd Business School, has done some work on this. What we have emphasized in particular, I think there is a couple of references at the bottom of this slide, which may or may not be evident if, oh, they got lost. I shall supply those references. She talks about all organizations, but particularly, for instance, social enterprises, arts and professional organizations, and the public sector as being hybrid organizations. In other words, having to balance economic objectives with those more social or environmental driven issues of our purpose. And so she does warn that not always is there a virtuous circle. That was Larry Fink's claim, that there's a virtuous circle between purpose and enjoying long-term profits. Sometimes purpose must be seen as, in some sense, in conflict, at least in the short term, with profitability and financial performance or economic performance. So what Mariah Besheroff proposes is two basic goals, financial goals and social goals, between which, and this may speak again to Michael Stadler's question, strategy has to navigate over time. And sometimes it will have to navigate most closely towards our financial goals, and sometimes it will have to go more closely to social goals. I've been following BP a little, and Bernard Looney, chief executive of BP, very much emphasized the social goals. His successor, Auchincloss, has moved the company closer to financial goals, perhaps reflecting economic difficulties, but also the campaigning effects of people like Vivek Ramaswamy. Paul Polman of Unilever very much focused on the social goals, and his successors have had to push closer towards the financial goals. Alan Jope, there's a case study on that illustration in chapter 6 on how you balance these two goals. So with that, I think I ought to finish. I think purpose is really important. I think it's inspiring for students, but we shouldn't minimize the difficulties, and the dynamic balance model of Mariah Besheroff, I think, helps. I will send the references now in chat.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So now we move into an entirely new component that we introduced in the last edition of the book, and that's cross-cutting themes, and 3 contemporary cross-cutting themes that pose new strategic challenges and are of interest for students. So it's non-for-profits, sustainability, and digital transformation. And of course, if we look at non-for-profits, these are then voluntary organizations or based on voluntary participation, charities, NGOs, and so forth. Sustainability, well, that's something that all organizations, and indeed all of us, are concerned about in terms of not only for organizations meeting economic needs for for-profit organization making a profit, but also managing positive relationships with the social and natural environment. And of course, also for non-for-profits to do this and meet their economic needs as well as they have. And then finally, then digital transformation or digital, and this is of course something that permeates all organizations and the whole society. And this transmits into fundamental transformations of organizations, and indeed an entirely new strategy business models. Okay, so this is the what then. So let's move to the next slide, Rufus. Why do we choose these three different contemporary themes then, cross-cutting themes going through all the chapters in the book? Well, first of all, student interest and attraction. I mean, students are increasingly interested in volunteer organizations, and indeed, many students, while they're studying, are engaged in volunteer organizations. They're interested in entirely new types of volunteer organizations in terms of peer-to-peer startups and so forth. And indeed, even organizations that are not entirely for-profit, and Richard referred to those, and Julia will speak more about those later. Hybrid organizations, well, that's also something that's of concern for students, where the purpose is not only making a profit, but actually making good for society generally. Then the environmental, well, of course, that's of concern, is something that climate change and so forth that students are concerned about and discuss a lot. And in many other courses and classes, of course, the UN Sustainable Development Goals are at the center. So that's something that needs to be integrated into strategy as well. And digital and AI technologies of different kinds are of concern for students as well. And they are interested in entirely new startups building on digital technologies. And if we look at their leisure times, of course, where do they spend their time? Well, they spend their time using digital technologies. And indeed, often students are more on top of the digital technologies compare what we are, and using video games and video game consoles and computer games and so forth. But this is not only of interest for students, but for organizations in general and society in general. So we have many non-for-profits in society. If we look at UK alone, we have around 500,000 non-profits. And sometimes they are huge and have huge impact on society, like NHS in the UK. When it comes to sustainability, well, one major concern for organizations, for-profit and non-for-profit, and society as a whole, is how to integrate sustainability into organizational strategy. And that's, of course, an important issue that we discuss in the book. And on the digitalization side, well, that's also something that permeates all organizations and society as a whole, in terms of course, generative AI, but also other types of digital technology in terms of platforms and Internet of Things and so forth. And indeed, now it turns around there. These are really part of mega trends. Climate change, sustainability questions and issues, digitalization, technological digital disruption. Well, they are part of megatrends, global megatrends. And of course, if organizations can use this in their own strategies, that's extremely powerful. Because if they can use that and exploit that and build their strategies on these megatrends, it's not only their own efforts and their own energy that implement strategy, but they can basically serve on the megatrend in terms of these. And when you see really successful organizations, they often exploit not only one, but several of these megatrends. Okay, so that was the what, that was the why. Let's look at the how then, in terms of how we do this. It should be a table on this slide, but I can talk about this anyway. So yeah, here maybe it comes here. But so how can we teach then these three different cross-cutting themes? Well, really, we can teach all three across the book. So we can teach each one of the different themes across the whole book in different ways. So non-for-profits, of course, well, virtually we can teach all different parts of non-profits throughout the whole book. And chapter 1 also covers an example in terms of how this can be done. But let me just give you some quick examples then. Of course, in total non-profits, purpose, vision, mission, and goals for chapter 1. Well, that's crucial in terms of getting volunteers on board on a non-profit. Thinking about the opportunities and threats in chapter 3, building resources and capabilities for a non-profit. Governance issues in chapter 6 is often crucial for a non-profit organization, and so is resource allocation decisions, and indeed the whole design and organization change how to develop volunteer and non-for-profit organizations over time. If we look at sustainability, well, Richard talked about organizational purpose before. Well, here really sustainability comes in, and I think that's one of the reasons why we discuss purpose more today than before, because organizations, for-profit and non-profit organizations, are concerned about the natural environment, are concerned about the social environment, and they also want to attract new employees that are concerned about this, and where they can fulfill both this larger purpose and also in for-profit organizations making a profit then. Chapter 3, in terms of the macro environment, of course, the impact on the wider environment, all sorts of different sustainability issues there. Also on the industry and sector level in terms of analyzing this. Building resources and capabilities in chapter 5, building sustainable resources and capabilities that in turn should build sustainable products and services is of concern, of course. And then chapter 6 on stakeholders and also discuss corporate social responsibilities, also of course something that sustainability relates to. And indeed in chapter 13 we discuss sustainability strategic options. Looking at the third theme then, digital, chapter 3 discuss digital megatrends. I already discussed that. Chapter 4, besides then discussing the competitive forces have been with us. They are with us today because they build on microeconomics, and the microeconomics have not changed. But what has come with digital technologies is new ways of creating value in ecosystems, and that's a new component that we have in chapter 4, discussing ecosystems and the way that we build ecosystems and create them value together rather than the more competitive focused 5 forces. Entirely new digital or digital based business models appear. In chapter 8 we discuss multi-sided platforms. Of course, the innovation chapter 11 concerns digital in terms of digital innovation. If we are to transform organizations digitally, well then of course leadership and change in chapter 16 are a concern. And finally in chapter 17 we discuss digital tools in terms of developing strategy. All sorts of cool digital tools now for developing strategy, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. So we can see that there are a range of concepts, frameworks and tools throughout the book that can be used for each one of these different cost-cutting themes. Let me dive into just a couple of examples of how we do this. So next slide, please. So when it comes to ecological part in Pestel, for example, of course, we discuss how organization can limit their CO2 emissions and pollution and how they can control their entire value chain and so forth in different ways. But we also go more into depth and discuss how ecological pressures indeed, they depend on their visibility, they depend on their certainty, they depend on their emotivity. And we also discuss how activists, leadership styles and regulations influence to what degree ecological issues become strategically important. But what we also emphasize in this chapter, but also throughout, is that there is a whole range of strategic implications for sustainability. So it's not only about following regulations, being legitimate, being responsible and so forth, but we can actually implement strategy on the basis of sustainability. So organizations can differentiate their services, their products to become sustainable, to become greener. Organizations can reduce costs by reducing waste. They can use sustainable and circular inputs, for example, or collaborate with partners that can make them more sustainable. So there are all range of different ways of integrating sustainability into strategy. Okay, another way, next slide, please, just to show you how we integrate the themes into the concepts, frameworks, and tools, was what I just talked about in terms of ecosystems. So ecosystems, that's a new segment in chapter 4, looking at how actors come together in an ecosystem to create value for all. And of course, they are interdependent here, so they can't create value alone, but they are only creating value if they come together and cooperate in the ecosystem. And what we emphasize here as well is that, well, usually in an ecosystem, we have an orchestrator and then a set of different complementers. So in the example I take here, Amazon, for example, as an orchestrator organizing the ecosystem. And then on top of that, we have a set of different complementers. But this is it's a little bit tricky, of course, because the orchestrator can compete with part of the complementers, as in this case for Amazon, and even complementers can compete with other complementers. But at the same time, they have to cooperate to create value for all. So it's a little bit more of a complex setup. And then we differentiate this from outside ecosystem then. So this was the how in terms of concept, frameworks, and tools. But there are several other ways that we integrate the cross-cutting themes throughout the book. So next slide, please. Okay, now the table is gone again. So let me check, and I can probably talk. You will be getting the slides after today's workshop, and then the table should be in there. But the table I had here was a table listing several cases in the text and version of the book. And that is indicated then by TNC in the table. So we have longer cases, medium long cases, and shorter cases in the book concerning with quite a few, both for non-profit, for sustainability, and for the third cross-cutting theme, digital. But besides this, we also have end of chapter cases that deals with the three themes. The case examples that we call them. So for non-profits, for example, we have the Aix-en-Provence Festival, for example, in chapter 16, and how they lead and change in a time of crisis. We have Wikimedia in chapter 17, and I will talk more about that in a moment. And how they implement open strategy. For sustainability, we have in chapter 10 on international strategy, a case example on Tamro. Tamro is a Norwegian bottling recycling manufacturer. And for them, going out globally and internationalizing, well, the machine, making the machines and so forth, that's not really the core issue here. The core issue is to enter into international markets and trying to adapt and trying to also convey and change norms and values and attitudes and towards being more sustainable so that they will adopt their machines. So that touches on institutional challenges and normative issues as well to change the attitude towards recycling of bottling. And then finally, the third cross-cutting theme, then a couple of examples of case examples there. We have the case on Airbnb in chapter 1, and in chapter 5, we have a case on the reconfiguration of resources and capabilities to make them more digital. So let me take a couple of those examples. So starting out with Wikimedia's open strategy in chapter 17. Next slide, please. So this was a case example, end of chapter case in chapter 17, and this case example then focus in on the strategy process and practices in terms of open strategy. So open strategy, strategy process and practices. And it's focused on the Wikimedia Foundation, a non-for-profit, and we're all probably familiar with Wikipedia, but there are many other units involved in the Wikimedia Foundation, Wikinews, Wiktionary, Wikidata, and so forth. And as you can see on the right of this slide. And what this case example discussed then is the advantages and disadvantages with open strategy, with opening up a strategy process for the whole organization. Well, of course, if we do this, we generate multiple ideas. So that's clearly an advantage. It also facilitates implementation because always, when we engage larger parts of an organization in strategy formulation, well, then in fact, we have already started to implement. So that's a clear advantage of open strategy. And this, of course, an open strategy approach to strategy development is also totally consistent with Wikimedia's volunteer ethos. So that goes really hand in hand here. But there are also drawbacks, clear risk of conservatism. Of course, if everyone is involved, there is a tendency that different parts of the organization want to stay with status quo. Maybe we will change over there, but my strategy is my part of the strategy. Well, we should probably not change that. So conservatism is an apparent risk. And it may also reinforce biases. If we are only the ones within the organization developing strategy based on open strategy, well, then if we don't have any outside views or outside eyes or involve anyone else here, there's a clear risk that this reinforces biases. And of course, this is time consuming. If we only have the top management of the team developing strategy, well, that may take some time, but not as long time as you have an open strategy process involving everyone. This is a case focused on strategy process and practices. And I should say it relates to chapter 17, but it certainly also relates to chapter 14 on strategy development processes. Another interesting issue of this case is the use of wiki technologies, as I said before, and there are all sorts of cool new digital technologies that can be used in developing a strategy and that are used today in terms of developing strategy. Okay, so let's take another example of a case example of end of chapter case. And this is one from chapter 4. It's focused on the digital side and the reconfiguration of retailing resources. And here, the focus is on the largest corporation on earth by turnover, and that is Walmart. And what Walmart are trying to do is to catch up with Amazon. And of course, Amazon is born digital, born with digital resources and capabilities throughout the organization. And this is something that Walmart have been struggling with for a few years to catch up. But what we want to emphasize here is also that it's being digital or having the latest generative AI and so forth, it's not enough. Often we can hear, well, if we just have that, we will build competitive advantages. Well, that's certainly not true at all. And they also have to fulfill the BRIO criteria that we discussed in chapter 4 here. And what's interesting here is the significance of combining brick and mortar with the digital. Yes, Walmart have to build digital resources and capabilities, but what they have as a large strength, on the other hand, is a huge brick and mortar setups. And it's really an omni-channel setup, combining digital online with brick and mortar that has turned out to be a success factor in retailing. And that's why Amazon, on the other hand, well, they are trying to catch up with Walmart on the brick and mortar side. So they acquired Whole Foods in the US a few years ago. And also they have indeed set up their own brick and mortar grocery stores, Amazon Fresh, even if they're tiny yet compared to Walmart. But it's an interesting dynamic in terms of them building resources and capabilities in this case. Okay, so then let's move to the next. And here we have another missing table. of illustrations. But as I say, you will be getting the slides after the workshop, and then you have a very convenient list of cases, convenient list of illustrations, and how they relate to the three different themes. So let me just briefly say a few words about this before we move to the next part. So if we look at non-for-profits, we have a whole range of illustrations concerned with this. Also in terms of sustainability, a whole range of different illustrations, and also in terms of digital. And just before handing over to the next part here and how to teach with illustrations, I want to emphasize that illustrations can be used in different ways. So they can be used as mini cases, as a case, and just having students, they haven't seen the case before, or perhaps studied it before class, or having them reading in the class, and then have a brief case discussion about it. But they can also be used for explaining concepts and frameworks indeed, and I will be giving you an example in a moment about that. But they can also be used for introducing a chapter or introducing concept, just as a start to open up a chapter, for example, on different issues. And they can also be used as a quiz or even for examinations. Yes, so that was it about the cross-cutting themes, and this is a good segue then to hand over to Julia and teaching the cross-cutting themes with illustrations.
Good. Thank you, Julia. Before Julia comes in, just to apologise that the tables are missing. That's entirely Pearson's fault, and just to reassure everybody, the tables are in the slides that Patrick sent us, and you will get a copy of them later.
Okay, thank you, Patrick, for introducing the cross-cutting themes, and now we are focusing especially on those illustrations. And just before I dig into the first illustration, which has to do with Amsterdam and a donut, which I will explain you in a minute, just very quickly to refer what Patrick says. Those illustrations are great because they are short one-page examples in the book, which can really be used for different kind of purposes. Think even students can read it in a session. You can use it as an exam example or exam questions where they have to read this mini case and mini example and think about questions or discuss questions. So I think although the cases and case examples are of course great to have larger in-depth discussions that students have to prepare, those illustrations are great examples to use in class, in sessions, or in exams. Now, the first illustration that I would like to just very, very briefly highlight to you is one that specifically links to sustainability and purpose that Richard has introduced in the context of the new chapter 6. So if we go to the next slide, I have summarized the illustration in chapter 6 on the city of Amsterdam. And the city of Amsterdam obviously is a public sector organization, some kind of hybrid organization that Richard has also mentioned. So we do in a sense have even two cross-cutting themes combined in this particular illustration. And this public sector organization, the city of Amsterdam, also has those struggles to have on the one hand economic goals, but on the other hand social goals. And what the city of Amsterdam has decided to focus on are the so-called donut economics, which have been introduced by Oxford economist Kate Raworth. And you can see the illustration on this slide. I can also paste additional references then in the chat and sources. So it's basically based on a donut with two different aspects. You have on one hand social foundations that you should meet, and on the other hand you have ecological ceilings that you don't want to surpass. So within this concept you are always concerned with the distance from the center. So you do want to go far enough from the center that nobody is left back in the hole of the donut, so to say. So you want to provide, as an organization, as a public sector organization, a safe and just space for humans, providing healthcare, providing a safe environment. And those goals are defined based on the UN Sustainability Development Goals. But on the other hand, you do not want to have too much economic growth in the sense, because if you are only focusing on maximizing economic growth, this often goes together with sacrificing natural resources and the environment. So you do not want to justify the resources. You do not want to go beyond this ecological ceiling. Ideally, you want to meet in the middle of the donut. And this is exactly what the city of Amsterdam does, and what is explained in this illustration, that they try to do public policy analysis always based on this balance. Do we go far enough to provide housing, to provide healthcare, to provide a safe space for humans? But don't we stretch the resources, ecological resources of our planet too far? And I've listed here different projects that are explained in the illustration that the city of Amsterdam has started in order to meet those donut economics. But of course, it also opens up interesting questions that you can discuss with your students, either in class by introducing sustainability and this concept of donut economics at the beginning, or by giving it to them as an assignment question in an exam, because they can then discuss if this concept, which might work for a public sector organization as the City of Amsterdam, could it be transferred to a private company? Is it possible? Are the goals that the City of Amsterdam is pursuing, are they really focusing on substantial social problems? Or is it not enough? Is it just a compromise that is taken? And if we go to the next slide, it's also, next slide. Yes, this one. It's also then quite straightforward to connect the concept of donut economics and the illustration to the two concepts of hybrid organizations that Richard has introduced before. So there's a nice connect of the illustration to the concepts that are also discussed in this chapter on purpose. I think the next, if we go to the next slide, digital is an illustration that Patrick will introduce very briefly to us.
Yes, so this illustration is on digital, and in chapter 4 then, and it's on Meta's Facebook challenges. And the illustration then shows how network effects and ecosystems actually can be discussed from the perspective of students themselves. So it starts off with pointing out that Facebook is only one in the long row of online communities. Before them, we had Friendster, MySpace, and many other online communities. But what Mark Zuckerberg, of course, realized was the import compared to the predecessors. He realized the importance of network effects and of ecosystems. So he has been better in terms of strategizing on the platform of Facebook. And network effects, of course, is really only an economies of scale effect on the demand side. The more, the merrier. The more people that use Facebook, the better for everyone. And this is easily explained for students, because students want online communities where their friends are. So they realize that the more and merrier concept here. They want to communicate with their friends and be on those online apps and in those communities where their friends are. But what they also realize is that these online communities need to update themselves. They need to add new features and so forth. And this, of course, in turn relates into the importance of ecosystems, the importance of bringing along different types of complementers inside an ecosystem that can produce and deliver those new cool features. So this relates neatly to different service and feature complementers inside ecosystems, and they will realize this quickly. And also that you in an ecosystem need to attract good software developers, good hardware developers that can produce new interesting features. But of course, new cooler apps will always appear, and that's what happened, of course, for Facebook. So Instagram came, WhatsApp came, and so forth. And Zuckerberg, being the strategist he is, he realized that, well, there's an apparent risk that Facebook will get behind. So he acquired Instagram, he acquired WhatsApp. These days, he can't do that because of antitrust authorities, and also that many of the new social communities will not sell to him. So what did Meta and Facebook do then? Well, they imitated the features of Snap and the features of TikTok. But students will also realize, well, that was not quite enough for them either, because they still rather use TikTok or indeed any other new apps compared to Facebook. Maybe their parents still use Facebook, but they will use other online communities. So they will realize that, well, perhaps Facebook will become one in the row of these collapsed then online communities over time. So this is a little bit of the theme throughout this illustration, discussing network effects through the insights of students, discussing ecosystems through the insights of students, and how important it is to have new features and come with new cool features on new social community apps. Okay, over to you again, Julia.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. And I think now one of my slides, some text might be missing due to animation. But just very quickly, I think you can then see it in the final slides. That is an illustration that now comes in this chapter 17 that Patrick has already mentioned in the context of the Wikimedia case. And I think that's just such a helpful chapter in the books, because it really helps to go beyond those abstract meaning of strategy, because that is sometimes missing in other textbooks. Because if you talk to students in a marketing course, they are very clear about what they might expect of being in a marketing department after their studies, and what should be their task if they are going into finance, or what should be their daily tasks if they're going into HR. But they are most of the time less clear and unsure about what are the tasks, what are the actions of a strategist. So this chapter really helps to discuss with students and introduce them to what are really the tasks, the tools, the things that strategists do in organizations and in different kind of organizations. And here we are again focusing in this illustration on a non-profit, on a public body, NICE, which is part of the Department of Health and Social Care in the United States. It is responsible to set standards for medical practice, for social care practice, basically to reduce variations within the NHS. But it has also become, I would say, sadly famous in the last years, because it was a controversial pioneer in introducing cost-benefit analysis based on the individual patient, and therefore was also in the news in terms of denying treatment, especially very expensive individual treatment, and increasingly coming under pressure for doing that. So again, different aspects that can be linked and different things that can be discussed with this illustration. What is interesting is that within this illustration, it is discussed that a new CEO is coming in, and she decides that a new strategy needs to be formulated. And then there are minutes provided by the strategy and NICE strategy board. And this now gives insights into what are the tasks, what are the contributions of the strategy board, What are the tasks and contributions of the CEO and management, and also of the involved consultants? So here you have a nice way to discuss with the students what were the different tasks of those different actors, how did they contribute either to the development of strategy, steering the development process, holding different actors accountable of implementing the strategy. So it's really nice to give a quick overview on what might be different actors in this process, also now within the firm, and what might be contributions of these actors to the actual strategy process, also based on discussing the tools that are discussed in the book, otherwise SWOT and 5 forces. So that's a nice way to discuss the students, those things with the students in this special setting of a non-profit public organization in a very delicate setting.
Thank you very much, Rufus. Thank you, Julia. Purpose has been a really important theme of the morning, I think, and it's one of the emphases of the 13th edition. I think Rufus will show the next slide, live from Croatia. And I've got a picture there of the Forth Bridge, which is a very, very long bridge between crossing the Forth just outside Edinburgh in Scotland. And the little English expression we often talk about is a job which starts again as soon as it's finished, is a bit like the Forth Bridge. If you have to paint the Forth Bridge, by the time you finish one end, you have to start at the other. You'll probably see Julia, Duncan and myself and Patrick crouched in the foreground with our paintbrushes there. That's what it feels like sometimes. Exposed, dangerous, hard work. Julia, we didn't fully explain that dangerous part of the job to you, did we? Apologies. Can you hear my clock going 10 o'clock? Anyway, the 13th edition published in 2023. We will be having to put together a first draft of the 14th edition by October 2024. The little cross there was originally supposed to be a smiley, but something got lost in translation from Croatia here. We will need, for that new edition, new and updated cases. And in a moment, I think Clive, Jason or Jocelyne, part of the new author case team, will be supplying in chat their contact for any ideas about new and updated cases. You have our contacts as well as authors, and the new and updated concepts, examples, illustrations and readings, we're delighted to have suggestions for those. The 14th edition won't be quite such a radical change, well, we think it was a radical change, as the 13th edition, where we inserted a whole new chapter, chapter 2, on working with strategy. We'll be basically working with what we have, but we do need that to be freshened up. And in a moment, I shall be asking for a poll for your favourite cases and your favourite concepts and chapters, so that you can give us a guide about what's really important to you in exploring strategy and what you'd like more of, less of. Okay, so in a moment, a poll is coming. But if Rufus can show this, the next slide. Thank you very much, Rufus. What we want to be true to all the time is exploring strategy philosophy, which is to give equal weight to strategic positions, strategic choices, and importantly, strategy in action. Duncan mentioned at the beginning that implementation is now a much more explicit focus, has always been very important. Julia was talking about chapter 17 on the actual practice of strategy. We believe that strategy in action is important. As you'll have seen from both Julia and Patrick's illustrations a moment ago, both profit and non-profit contexts are important to us. Illustrations, the end of chapter cases, and in the cases in the case and chapters and cases book, we like both short and long cases. And as you'll have seen, I think in the Thinking Differently and in the text, we are increasingly reaching out for non-Western ideas. So, for instance, there's an illustration on non-Western indigenous theories of leadership in this current edition of the 13th edition. We will be looking for more in the 14th edition, because we recognize that your students and our students come from all over the world, and the sort of rational and analytical, detached concepts that we sometimes have basically derived from the North American Anglo context may not translate all across the world to all student audiences. And there's lots for us to learn from those contexts too. So Western and non-Western ideas we're delighted to have. Now, Harshita has got the poll ready, and she says it's ever so easy. So please, good. She's going to prove it. Here's the first one. We've got 4 questions. Which of the 5 chapters do you use most in your teaching? I don't know whether you can all go through those. Could you just respond to those as quickly as possible? Are we getting some responses? Harshita might be able to tell us whether we're getting responses coming in. Great, thank you. More, I hope. Oh, macro, yeah, good. Working with strategy. No one else doing that yet? Okay. We think it's really good. Oh, 2. Super. Okay. Resources and capabilities. Yes, that's important. Yeah. Oh, resources and capabilities. And mine is coming up first. International strategy. Interesting. Right. Okay. Super. International strategy, leadership, practice of strategy. Glad to see that. Okay, right. And Harshita will record this. This will be a guide to us. Which one chapter do you feel needs most updating? That's the next question. Look lively. If there's a chapter you think needs a bit more work than we might otherwise do. Let's see, what have we got? Nothing so far. They're all fine. Okay, you can always come back to that. Which one new concept would you like? Does anyone, you can also introduce that or talk about it in the chat. Has anyone got a new concept they'd like to? I think there's some text. You can do some free text in there. Not getting anything here.
Polls.
You can't submit responses. Poll is not shared.
Hold on.
Or please use the poll not working. Please use the chat then. Same here. We can't submit the responses. Oh, excuse me. Could you use the chat for talking about which 2 cases do you use most in your teaching? I need to share responses perhaps first. Can you see it now? Okay. We would like, same thing for everybody. Could you, in chat, please tell us a concept you would like to see to improve CSR? Okay, thank you. Anybody else? To improve CSR. I rather agree. That's my chapter. I'm responsible for that. I think I know what you mean. Greg, you might want to, in the swap shop session, you might want to do that. Improve, talk about that, how we can improve that. Use of AI in strategy. We've got some of that in chapter 17, but we could do more. Use of AI in strategy, definitely we can do more. Omni-channel approach, to have a supplement on the hottest channels the students are using. Agree on AI. The poll must be on your screens now. Which one chapter do you think needs most updating? We've only got one response, so business strategy and models. Implementing strategy has one. We've got some answers on frameworks. Governance, okay, that needs some updating. Matthew, if you can, in the prep for the swap shop, perhaps you could develop that. Indeed, if people have suggestions for particular concepts or things that need to be improved, that would be great. Implementation again, Eamon, thank you. We did try, at least I tried actually, that was again my chapter. We did try to improve that, the implementation part. So I'll be very interested, Eamon, in hearing what you have to say. Okay, I think we're gonna, the poll is not working very well, but we have the chat open. And I've learned something. We've learned quite a lot about which chapters are being used most. I think Harshita is gathering that. So evaluating strategies, that's being used quite a lot. So here, thank you very much for participating in the poll insofar as you're able to. The chat will have captured some more ideas. What we would like, please, is if you could prepare for what we'll call our swap shop session at the end of the afternoon. If you join into breakout groups, I think Harshita will create breakout groups, hopefully of about 6 or 7. We may need to reorganize them according to how attentive and active people are. We will put you in groups. What we would like you to do is consider your greatest teaching and related challenges. What's tough at the moment? Now, that might be all sorts of things from student participation, assessment, or particular concepts. We've had a number of concepts like purpose raised, which might be difficult to teach. From your colleagues in that group, some solutions. And if anybody's tried something which is really cool, which the world should know about, please could they report back on that? We're going to, we got some... already we got some invitations going out. Julia is going to explain how the Padlet is going to work, and we're hoping the Padlet will work a little bit better.
Yes, so I'll post a link here in the chat, which will take you to a Padlet wall. You might have used that already. If not, it's quite straightforward. You can add beneath the number of your room. So if you are in room number 8, you can just go to the column group 8. And by clicking on the plus, you can very easily add a comment and write down. So that would help us to keep track of your ideas, your comments, your suggestions. Anything that you discuss in your breakout rooms, please add it to the column of your room so that we can then share it with everybody and we have everything collected and summarized. I can post it then in the different breakout rooms, pretty straightforward to just go there and add the plus.